On this episode, I want you to imagine with me that you're taking your car in to go see a mechanic because that check engine light had just turned on. But this time, you decide to do things a little bit differently. You take it in to see 3 different mechanics, and you get 3 different responses. One might say that it's the transmission, yet another might say that it's the engine, while another might say that it's the sensor. Would you spend thousands of dollars on repairs before knowing what is actually wrong with your car? Most likely not, and at least I hope you don't. But now I want you to imagine that this car is a child or a teenager. Perhaps they have been struggling to focus in school. Maybe they have been having emotional meltdowns, difficulty with friends, or falling behind academically. One person says that it's ADHD. Another might say that it's oppositional defiant disorder. And someone else might say that it's autism. As a parent, we're left with the same question. What is it? And why can't I just get a simple, straight answer? It truly can feel frustrating at times. On this episode, we're going to be talking about psychological and neurodevelopmental assessments, what they are, how they can be valuable, how they can help, and also allowing us to move forward by not guessing and understanding. Because we're going to break down some of the most common assessments that are tools for diagnosing ADHD and autism, and this may include the Vanderbilt ADHD Diagnostic Rating Scale, or the BASC-3 and the Brief-2, and I hope by the end of this episode you might have a clear understanding as to what these assessments might measure, why they matter, and how they can be very helpful, whether it's in school accommodations or support for your child and teenager, so you and your child can get the answers that you have been looking for, and also receiving the help that you need. Why do we think the way that we do? And what are we really thinking inside of our minds that shapes the way that we think, feel, and connect? Welcome to my podcast. I'm Andrew, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a mental health professional. Neurocurious is my podcast that explores the mind and curiosity with inspiration. From parenting and emotional development in relationships to mental health and everyday behavior, each episode is to explore the psychology we face as well as endure in real life. Parents would often ask me if the child and teenager even needs a neurological or a psychological assessment. It really is a personal choice, but there are some pros as well as cons. Let's start with the cons. It can be expensive, especially with whom you go to conduct these assessments. It is often based on qualifications as well as credentials, and typically it's conducted by a clinical psychologist or whoever is trained and qualified to complete these assessments. But it is more than just checking off on a piece of paper. It also requires interviewing, observations, and hours of putting data together to determine the scoring. Sometimes they're written up to almost 20 to 30 page reports, depending on how many assessments have been completed and how long the interview process was. Some parents may feel that other assessments were just unnecessary. Well, that's not always the case. Sometimes it is necessary. A mental health therapist, depending on their level of competence and training, it can conduct certain screenings as well as assessments. However, a clinical psychologist can really get into the root of the diagnosis, such as performing neuropsychological assessments. Think of it like this. You're feeling more lightheaded, sweaty, getting shaky, and experiencing other physical symptoms. Well, some might say that you're having a diabetic shock. Some might say that you are having anemia. But the thing is, you don't really know because someone might tell you that you need to have more protein and B12 vitamins in your system. The only way that you really get to know what is going on in your system is to undergo a series of tests by having your blood drawn for analysis and to determine what it may be. Is it pricey? Sure. But it depends on your insurance coverage, but at least you will know the exact root and cause of the problem. And then you may receive proper treatment afterwards with a much better prognosis than you have guessed. So with mental health, it's very much the same. You see one clinician and they say that your diagnosis might be bipolar disorder. Another might say that you have ADHD. Some diagnoses can meet certain criteria, but it could also be very confusing. For example, anxiety can appear as generalized, social separation, and so forth. Similar to ADHD, there are different criteria, but it could also be unspecified or combined, inattentive, Just like getting a diagnostics on your car, the mechanic will find different issues when the check engine light comes up. Do we want to pay attention to those diagnostics? I would hope so. The thing is, do we want to pay for those diagnostics? Of course not, because it really can be expensive. It's not fun, but it will cost you much less when you find out what the issue is now than what it would be later on. It could cause much bigger problems and bigger issues. Well, also with mental health, finding the right diagnosis and its subtypes can sometimes promote the best treatment because the clinician knows what the target is. With that said, what are the pros? The assessments I'm going to discuss will identify the characteristics and criteria necessary to enhance that treatment, such as conduct behavior, working memory, and so forth. It's also supposed to be helpful because some schools may need a full psychological assessment in order to move forward with developing a 504 plan or an individual education plan, also known as an IEP. These plans promote accommodations for the child in school to help them achieve academic performance. Other times, insurance companies may require a full diagnostic evaluation, such as the report for autism spectrum disorder, in order to approve for applied behavioral analysis, or also known as ABA services. In order for that child or teenager to receive treatment from a behavioral analysis and in-home services from an RBT or a registered behavioral technician. However, the following assessments I'm going to share are typically used for neurodevelopmental disorders. There are literally thousands of diagnostic assessments as well as screenings, but these are the ones that are more common when getting an evaluation report for ADHD as well as autism. All right, the first one. It's known as the Vanderbilt ADHD Diagnostic Rating Scales, or the VADRS. It includes informant forms for parents as well as teachers. The initial assessment scales have two components. The first one measures symptom assessments, and the second one measures impairment in performance. The initial scales also have symptom screens for three other comorbidities: oppositional defiancy, conducts, as well as anxiety with depression. This assessment can be used for children ages 6 to 12. I wouldn't recommend it for middle school or high school teens because one of the assessments must be completed by a teacher. And the reason why I don't always recommend it for middle school or high school kids is because the teachers don't really get to know the child during class time except for that one class. So they might see the student for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, however long the class is, depending on the school district you're in, but it really depends on what the school schedule is. So if the assessment is given to a math teacher and the student really struggles in math class, the scores are obviously going to be higher because the teen's difficulty with focusing. But given that it's in an art class and the student does really well in art, the scores are going to be much lower because the student thrives in art. That is why it's usually better for elementary school teachers to complete these assessments because they see the child on a day-to-day basis in various settings and various subjects, as well as in their everyday performance, that you're going to likely get more accurate data. It is still a good screening tool for measuring inattentive symptoms, such as forgetfulness or being easily distracted, as well as hyperactivity and impulsivity, which may include fidgeting and talking excessively. Additionally, it can be helpful to screen oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and anxiety with depression. But something to keep in mind is that when using a screening tool, it's not a standalone diagnostic test. Sometimes it has to go through more observation, more testing, because the Vanderbilt is a screening. Another assessment is the Behavior Assessment System for Children, or the BASC-3. It is a set rating scale and forms that help clinicians understand the behaviors as well as the emotions of that child or the adolescent. Some things that they might look for, such as hyperactivity and attention problems. It's similar to the Vanderbilt, but it analyzes the child's behaviors from three different perspectives. First, a sense of self. So they're able to do their own self-reporting. The other one is from their teacher. And then third, their parent. Using a comprehensive set of rating scales, and forums to help you understand the internal as well as the external challenges of the child as well as the teenager. Other areas that this assessment can measure are externalizing these problems, such as the hyperactivity, the aggression, as well as the defiance. While with internalizing problems such as anxiety, depression, and other feelings of inadequacy, it also can measure attention and school functioning, such as learning problems or executive functioning, as well as social functioning, social relationships, social skills, social cues, and adaptability in these skills, such as activities of daily living, as well as high development of those social skills. I know for me, it is very helpful to know as a clinician so that I can better understand the client's work as well as helping them coach through communication strategies or developing interpersonal relationships so that they can improve their social cues. Another assessment that might be helpful is the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Functioning Second Edition. That's a mouthful, so we'll just call it the brief 2. But it's helpful because it assesses the function as well as the self-regulation of that child or teenager between the ages of 5 to 18 years old. It can also be administered individually using a rating scale completed by the parent, a teacher, as well as the child making a self-report. If the child is old enough to understand what it is that they're filling out and what it is that they're doing. This assessment can also help identify executive functions such as mental skills that help manage certain behaviors, emotions, attention, and critical thinking. It can also be valuable because it can help the client with day-to-day basis, such as working on organization skills or learning emotional regulation when they're just feeling a little bit off. And then also working on transitions between activities and tasks, because sometimes moving from one task or another, it's not that easy as you would think, because the child can feel overwhelming as well as the teenager. So working through those transitions, the brief 2 really can be helpful so that we can measure what it is of their vulnerabilities, their limitations, as well as recognizing their strengths and abilities so that we can coach them as and knowing what would better fit for their treatment plan, like cognitive behavioral therapy or TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, depending on what that emotional function is. As we wrap this up, I want you to understand that one important key element with assessments, they do not define your child. Let me repeat that. Assessments do not define your child. They are not a label, okay? But it is a tool that can help understand them. And then the clinician has the data that they need so that they can provide the best treatment possible for that child so that they can apply it on a daily basis. Whether it's the Vanderbilt or the BASC-3 or the Brief 2, there are so many other comprehensive psychological assessments. And the goal is not to place a label on the child. It never has. That was never the purpose. But it is to identify their strengths and their abilities and also to understand their challenges as well as weaknesses and limitations. Because it's going to create a pathway to success for the rest of their lives. Not knowing how to manage those symptoms, it could cause problems long term. The best prognosis is to know what it is that they have right now to treat them moving forward. So whether your child has ADHD, autism, ODD, be grateful because now you were able to pinpoint what exactly is wrong with that engine. Not saying there's anything wrong with your child, but what is going on with that engine so that you can receive the proper diagnosis and the proper treatment and prognosis. Because it's like what I say, neurodevelopmental disorders are not curable, but they are manageable. As parents, it can feel very overwhelming when they're searching for answers, but sometimes we just don't know where to look. Well, now you have the answers. While assessments require time and patience, they may be worth the financial investments to provide clarity about your child. If you wonder what assessment might be right for your child, don't hesitate to ask a mental health professional. Don't hesitate to ask the clinical psychologist or your pediatrician or a school counselor. That's what they're there for. Because when we are curious, keep this in mind, when we are curious, we will find the answers that we will need if we want to create that change. If we want our child or teenager to be productive so that we can better help them now. As a child or a teenager receives the treatment that they may need and has the right support and has the right accommodations and interventions, they will thrive rather than survive. I hope that this podcast helped you. Please consider sharing it with a parent, a friend, or someone that you feel like might need it. And remember, the more curious we become about the mind, the more we understand each other. Until next time, be good to yourself. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not to be a replacement for therapy. If you're struggling and need support, I highly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.